Celosia. The flower that looks like it is straight out of Alice's Wonderland fever dream. It's bold, it's textural, it is a true garden standout. So why are so many gardeners complaining about floppy stems? And how do you avoid making those same mistakes? Let's get into it. Celosia is a sun lover. And for any of your full sun flowers, that typically means they need 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight. However, with Celosia, the closer you get to 8 or more hours, the happier it's gonna be in your garden. It's considered to be a warm season annual. You can start it indoors about 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost. And you'll wanna wait until your soil temperature has warmed up to about 60 degrees or higher before you transplant those seedlings out into your garden. So that's the same thing if you wanna direct sow. They transplant really easily as little plantlings. They also direct sow really easily and germinate really easily. Even like older seeds. So last year I tested some of my seeds for their like viability. Their viability window is like 3 to 5 years. And I tested some, I think on the older side. I'll have to pop up that information because I don't remember exactly how old they were. It's also from 2021, it is this feathered Celosia. And as you can see, I think all of them germinated. That's really exciting. That means that these are perfectly fine. And I've also had really good germination rates in the greenhouse. I had a like 90 to 100% germination rate with those seed tests. And that's crazy. I don't think I had that with any of my other seeds. They do require light to germinate. I'll either like very lightly cover them with vermiculite. Most of the time I just like stick them in the soil and just let them like do their thing. Now the second culprit of floppy stems is going to be when it comes to watering. Celosia is known for being pretty temperamental when it comes to its watering needs. These babies do not like to have soggy roots. And we're talking all stages of plant life. I've started my seeds in soil blocks and in cell trays, and honestly, both methods work beautifully. I don't really have a preference for them doing better one way or another. I think that they're a pretty easy plant to start. When I start my seeds, I get my soil like pretty saturated with water, but not like super muddy and sloppy. That way the seeds are going into a nice like moist environment to begin with. And then I tend to like bottom water all of my seeds until they're strong enough to take like overhead watering. Now with Celosia, I will let my soil blocks and the soil in my seed trays almost dry out completely before I go in with more water, because they are very prone to dampening off, which is essentially a soil-borne like fungal disease. It can cause like a whole array of issues, and there's a lot of different things that kind of cause it. But I find with Celosia, when I'm over watering them and keeping that soil really wet, when the temperatures are a little bit cooler in my greenhouse, things like that can kind of create this perfect little ecosystem for my seedlings and plantlings to dampen off. And then once I transplant them out to my garden, they do best in a very like well draining soil. And then similarly to when they're like seedlings, I let the top inch or so of my soil in my garden beds dry out before I go in and I water them again. And this kind of varies like how frequently and how often I'm actually going out and watering my Celosia, depending on the weather that we're having. Sometimes it's like every 2 to 3 days, sometimes it's every other day. It just depends on how hot it's been and how dry it's been for how long during the summer. But I do find that they can handle being like dried out a lot better than some of my other plants. So my Celosia typically blooms from like early to midsummer until late fall. And there is a range of gorgeous colors, textures. It would be very difficult for me to pick a favorite, but if I had to, I am a huge fan of like the coxcomb mixes, just because I think that it adds the most interesting like textural and visual elements to my garden and to my cut arrangements. I can say that almost every time I bring in bouquets or arrangements and things like that, there's always somebody who's like, oh my gosh, what is this flower? This is so weird and so cool. So it's just kind of fun to see people's reactions. If you're not a gardening person, if you're not a flower person, like a lot of people have never seen this flower before and they just think it's like the coolest thing. There's 3 main different varieties. I grow all of them. I use all of them. I love pairing it out in my garden beds with my zinnias and my rudbeckia. I think I had some self-seeded larkspur growing in one of my beds with my celosia, and it's so beautiful with everything. Celosia is just so wonderful. It's great for pollinators. I cannot tell you how many bumblebees have been out in my celosia this year. It is crazy, and I just get like so excited and giddy every time I go out there. If you're growing it as a cut flower, I would say to harvest it when about 2/3 of the flower is open. And then honestly, it'll last in your vase for like up to 2 weeks. I've had some of my celosia, the like pink bunny tails, I've had that last in a vase for almost a month. It just keeps going and going, and it's perfect. So we've talked sun needs, we've talked watering needs. Now let's talk fertilizer, because this is another culprit of floppy stems, dull flowers, and that's when you're using a fertilizer that's too high in nitrogen. So with fertilizers, I mean, I say it all the time, I don't tend to fertilize my plants, but if you are wanting to fertilize your plants, I would look for like a slow releasing fertilizer, something that's very well balanced, not too high in nitrogen. But what I typically do is I just amend my soil with compost at the beginning of spring, and I don't tend to run into too many issues with my celosia. Now, all these things that we've talked about that are like culprits of floppy stems, they're also potential stressors for your plants, right? A floppy stem plant is not a healthy plant. And when your plants are stressed, it's a very inviting situation for pests, right? So with celosia, the pests that you really have to look out for are spider mites and aphids. I've never had spider mites on my celosia or really any of my plants, but I do deal with aphids almost every year for different reasons, usually my dahlias. But I have had aphids on my celosia. I don't remember if it was last year or the year before. It's pretty minimal, and it was like relatively easy for me to like nip that in the butt. Butt or bud? Nip it in the bud, nip it in the butt. I feel like bud is what you want to nip. Let me know in the comments. Anyways, it was not a difficult issue for me to get rid of. So just something to keep in mind. I say it all the time. I'm not someone who uses a lot of chemicals in my garden. So the happier and healthier that I can keep my plants, the happier I am, the happier my garden is. I find that that's a nicer way to keep the bad bugs out, is just to make sure that I'm doing my due diligence to make sure that my plants are in a good position to take care of themselves. But if you're someone who's trying to decide, you know, if you want to plant celosia for the first time, I think that you should absolutely plant it in your garden, use it in cut arrangements, just enjoy like the weirdness that it adds to your garden, because it's so beautiful and so cool, and you just don't see it very often in people's gardens. So definitely give this one a try. Just be careful, make sure you have a nice sunny place, make sure you don't overwater, and use a well-balanced fertilizer, and you'll be a-okay. And I think that's all that I have for you today. Please let me know if there's anything that I didn't cover, any questions that you have, please leave them down in the comments and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And thank you so much for being here. I'll see you guys in the next one.